Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. I just want to say before I begin that if you're a parent who lost a child, I'm deeply, deeply sorry. I know the kind of pain that brings somebody here. You aren't alone, and I'm glad you're here. In this video, I'd like to share my story, the day leading up to Eliana falling ill, and afterwards. I wrote all the details down several months after she passed, so I wouldn't forget anything. And I'm glad I did, because if I were to remember everything in detail now, 15 years later, it would be very hazy to me. So I'm glad I wrote everything down when I did. I'm going to split the story into, I would say, 4 or 5 videos, because I feel this will be a little emotional for me. I don't know, something might trigger since I haven't read this piece for several years. So I'd rather split it into several videos instead of reading the whole piece. It was the day, Monday, August the 8th, 2011. It was the day my mum would come over, arrive from England, and she would fly out here every summer to visit us. I always looked forward to her visits because they were very special. She would bring a suitcase full of English chocolate, cookies, and cakes, and the kids would hover around with anticipation where their grandma unpacked. My mum was supposed to arrive here the middle of July, but she had to go for minor surgery, so her vacation had to be rescheduled for Monday. And this day was also our 13th wedding anniversary. Since we had to pick up my mother from Chicago airport around noon, my husband Dan decided to take the day off work and stay home with us so we could all go together to the airport. Looking back, I was very glad we were all there on that fateful day, united as a family. On that particular morning, I was pottering around the house, doing last-minute preparations. The kids were watching television, and Eliana was upstairs showering. After her shower, she came downstairs and decided to play Barbies together with her younger sister, Jessica. Around 10:30 a.m., Eliana came into the living room, told me she had a slight headache, and that the left side of her body felt numb. I actually didn't think anything about it. I figured, well, she may have pins and needles from sitting on the floor playing Barbies. And for the headache, well, I decided to give her Tylenol and a glass of water. I assured her everything would be okay and to just relax for a little while before we had to make our trip down to Chicago to pick up my mom. I sat down on the couch beside her, and then she asked me to hold her hand. Once in a while, Eliana would ask me to hold her hand if she wasn't feeling too well. Dan came over by her and asked how she was doing. She didn't say too much because she really didn't know what was going on. After a minute or two, she then started complaining of a stomachache. I looked at Dan with a blank stare, not knowing what to say. All of these symptoms came on so very suddenly, and we didn't know what to make of it. Suddenly, Eliana hurriedly got up from the couch and ran to the bathroom. She began throwing up. I didn't know what to make of this and said, "Eliana, are you okay? Are you okay?" I felt helpless. We had to leave in an hour to go to the airport, and it didn't look like Eliana would be able to make it to the airport, as sick as she was. She stayed in the bathroom for a couple of minutes. I stood outside the bathroom, waiting for her to come out, when all of a sudden the door slowly opened, and she came crawling out on her hands and knees. She crawled to the living room and shouted, Help me! Help me! I began shaking. I stood there in disbelief. Dan and I could not believe what we were seeing or hearing. We were both standing there not knowing really what to do. We were looking at one another almost in a state of shock, trying to comprehend what was truly going on. Eliana was fine 25 minutes ago, and now she was shouting for help. I then suddenly had the presence of mind to call 911. Although I could feel my voice shaking with fear, I bravely did what I had to do. I shouted to Dan, "Something isn't right here. Something isn't right." I began feeling a sense of panic. Both Jessica and Daniel didn't know what was going on and were too young to understand and just stared helplessly at their sister, wishing they could somehow help. Dan hurriedly went over to her and helped her on the couch, but she somehow fell off the couch onto the floor and threw up once again. Daniel took a pillow and propped her head up as she lay on the floor. After I hung up with 911, I began to notice that she was beginning to get weaker and her eyes started to close. Suddenly, her head went from side to side, and she said, "I don't want to die. I don't want to die." I said to her in a panic-stricken voice, "Eliana, don't be silly. You're not going to die. You'll be okay, we promise. I just called for the rescue squad. They're on their way." I told her not to go to sleep and to stay awake. She then suddenly had a slight seizure. She started to drift off into unconsciousness. This was very traumatic for everyone, but we didn't know why. Fear started to grip me. My insides turned to jelly, and I felt myself shaking from head to toe. Dan cleared everything out of the way to ensure the rescue squad had easy access into the house. He ordered Daniel and Jessica to lock the dogs away upstairs. It was chaos. I remember pacing up and down, glancing at Eliana, telling her she will be okay. Confusion set in as I found it difficult to understand why this suddenly came about. Just out of the blue. I had my hands on my head thinking, "Oh no, what is going on? What is going on? Please, God, do not let anything happen to her, please." I was in panic mode, besides being in a state of shock, because we didn't know what was happening. We just felt so helpless. We wanted to help her so badly, but we couldn't. I kept praying in my head for God's help. Dan bent down over her and tried to talk to her and told her to keep her eyes open and to not fall asleep. I ran outside to the end of the driveway to look out for the rescue squad. I began to cry a little as I was walking back up the driveway. I looked up to the sky and shouted, "Please, God, watch over Eliana. Don't let anything happen to her. I beg you." I began shaking a little more, ran inside the house again, desperately wanting to know what was going on, pacing up and down, feeling panic-stricken. A few minutes later, the rescue squad arrived. I knelt down by Eliana and said, "Help's here, Eliana. They will take care of you." She heard me because her head moved and her lips slightly moved as if she was trying to get the words out. I then said, "You will be okay, Eliana." As one of the first responders knelt down by Eliana, they asked Dan and I what had happened. I hurriedly spoke of the circumstances surrounding the sudden decline of my daughter. The lady told Eliana to try and stay awake. She asked her for her name, and I heard my daughter mumble her name, but her voice became faint. They also asked her who the president was. She said in a very weak voice, "I don't know." Eliana was going into a deeper state of unconsciousness. She was able to mumble a few words, but also it seemed like she was losing consciousness very rapidly. Never would I have thought this would be the last time I would hear my daughter's dear voice. As soon as the rescue squad left the house, I dropped Jessica off at a neighbor's house and then followed the ambulance to the hospital. Dan and Daniel left to go to the airport to pick up my mom. I really don't remember following the ambulance. I felt like I was in another state of mind. I kept praying and praying that everything will be okay. Thank you for letting me share the first part of the story. Talking about her keeps her memory alive, and I appreciate it very much. I will continue in my next video. Please be kind to yourselves and God bless.